The lamps are lit at the village pub, the rain's easing off, and another Agatha Raisin mystery is about to unfold. Do tell us, where in the world are you listening from tonight? Your comments make this cozy corner feel even warmer, and if you've not subscribed yet, go on. Pull up a chair and join us for every case to come. Let's step inside, shall we? It was one of those April mornings that made Carsley look as though it had been dipped in honey. The air was soft, the hedgerows freckled with primrose, and the sky, though still uncertain of itself, showed patches of optimism between lazy clouds. To the casual observer, the village seemed at peace, but to anyone who knew the Cotswolds, and particularly Carsley, peace was often just gossip in its quietest form. From her kitchen window, Agatha Raisin glared at a stubborn streak of icing sugar across the counter. The offending sugar was part of a much larger campaign, her triumphant re-entry into village society via the annual wedding cake competition at the spring fete. It had been, she told herself sternly, a dreadful winter. Too much time spent alone with takeaway curries and bad television, not enough admiration from her neighbours. Something must be done, and nothing restored a reputation quite like victory, even if it involved buttercream and bunting. "It's ridiculous," she muttered, smoothing her hair with one hand and inspecting her reflection in the kettle. "Me, competing with that Dent woman as if we're both housewives from a jam commercial." That Dent woman was Marjorie Dent, Carsley's reigning queen of sponge. Her cakes were precise, her manners frostier than her fondant, and she'd once been known to return a Victoria sponge to the Women's Institute for being structurally unsound. Agatha had privately referred to her as the Marie Antoinette of the mixing bowl, but today she'd need more than sharp wit to win. The competition was tied to the upcoming wedding of Dawn Carter, the local fitness instructor, whose idea of modesty was wearing sequined leggings to yoga. The entire village had been roped into preparations. Agatha had volunteered, magnanimously she thought, to oversee the cake entries, though secretly she intended to submit one herself under a pseudonym. When she arrived at the village hall, the smell of vanilla and ambition hit like a wall: sugar, nerves, and the rustle of bunting. Agatha called the entries to the table. Chatter swelled, forks were poised, and Peter Draycott stepped up smiling for the first slice. He tasted the iced sponge, blinked once, and folded as if a string had been cut. Chairs scraped, someone screamed, and the room pitched from fate to fiasco in a heartbeat. The morning after Peter Draycott's collapse dawned cold and blameless, as if the weather had decided to wash its hands of the whole affair. A thin mist clung to Carsley's hedgerows, muting even the gossip for a few hours. But by mid-morning, the quiet had cracked, and talk spread like butter on warm toast. At Lilac Cottage, Agatha Raisin stood before her mirror, attacking her hair with a brush as though it had personally wronged her. Her reflection glared back, eyes sharp, jaw set, but there was a flicker of something beneath the bravado, the unease of a woman who'd seen her name once again sliding into village infamy. "Poisoned cake," she muttered. "It would have to be at my event." The doorbell chimed. She opened it to find Mrs. Bloxby, angel of mercy in cardigan and pearls, balancing a plate of scones. "I thought you might like something comforting," Mrs. Bloxby said gently, stepping inside. "Unless those are laced with arsenic, they'll do," Agatha replied, though she softened enough to clear a space on the kitchen table. They sat, the vicar's wife pouring tea with quiet grace while Agatha recounted the previous day's chaos. When she finished, Mrs. Bloxby said, "You mustn't blame yourself, dear. No one could have expected—" "Oh, nonsense," Agatha interrupted. "Someone will expect it. Marjorie Dent, for a start. She's probably already sobbing into a handkerchief at the police station, telling them I murdered poor Peter out of professional jealousy." Mrs. Bloxby smiled faintly. "You do underestimate how fond people are of talking about you." Before Agatha could retort, the phone rang. She picked up, bracing herself. "Aggie, darling," came Roy Silver's unmistakable voice, bright, nasal, and utterly unconcerned with decorum. "You have done it now." "Roy, I've done nothing," Agatha snapped. "Oh, don't be modest. Local sleuth linked to fatal cake. It's practically headline gold. I can see it now. Agatha Raisin investigates death by dessert. Brilliant title, no. We'll pitch it as a PR redemption story." "Roy, if you continue, I'll strangle you with your own tie. And it'll be Paisley. I'll make sure of it." "Fine, fine. But do think about it. Scandal sells, darling." Agatha slammed the receiver down and groaned. Mrs. Bloxby, ever the diplomat, took another sip of tea and murmured, "He does mean well, in his way." "So does a wasp," said Agatha. They were interrupted again, this time by a knock at the door. Bill Wong stood there, hat in hand, looking like the reluctant messenger of doom. "Morning, Agatha," he said. "You'd better not be here to arrest me," she replied. "Not today," he said with a faint smile. "Mind if I come in?" He accepted a cup of tea but didn't sit immediately. His tone turned grave. "The coroner's report came in early. It was cyanide, mixed into the icing." Agatha stared. "Cyanide? Good Lord. Who on earth uses that these days? It's not 1920. "Apparently someone does. And there's something else." He hesitated. "Marjorie Dent told us she saw you near the cakes before the tasting. Said you moved a plate." Agatha shot to her feet. "That's absurd. I was moving the napkins, not the cakes. She's twisting it. You know how she is. Can't bear the thought of me stealing her thunder." Bill raised a placating hand. "I'm not accusing you, but she's made a statement. It'll stir things up." "It already has," Agatha muttered darkly. Mrs. Bloxby intervened. "Surely, Inspector, no one truly believes Agatha could—" "It's just procedure," Bill said gently. Then, with a glance at Agatha, "You know how these things go. Please, don't get involved. Let us handle it." Agatha gave him a tight smile that usually meant the opposite of agreement. "Of course. Wouldn't dream of interfering." Bill sighed. "I mean it, Agatha." "Yes, yes," she said airily. "You can trust me." As soon as he left, Mrs. Bloxby looked at her friend with that mild expression that often preceded a sermon. "You're going to stay out of it, aren't you?" "Naturally," Agatha said. Then, noticing the vicar's wife's doubtful gaze, she added, "Well, I'll stay out of it until someone else makes a mess of it, which should take about 3 hours." Mrs. Bloxby shook her head, smiling as she gathered her things. "Just be careful, dear. Pride can be a dangerous motive, in murder or in meddling." When she had gone, the cottage felt oppressively quiet. Outside, the mist had thickened, swallowing the lane in pale greyness. Agatha tidied the table, her movements brisk and unnecessary. The accusation lingered in her mind like a bad aftertaste. She tried reading, then gardening, then even sorting through her tax receipts, all with the single-minded desperation of a woman avoiding thought. But by evening, the village gossip had filtered through via a text from Roy. "Marjorie claims she saw you lace the sponge. Darling, if you're going to poison anyone, at least do it stylishly." Agatha threw her phone onto the sofa with a growl. "If I ever commit murder, Roy will be first," she muttered. At 9:30, there was another knock. Expecting another reporter, she opened the door with a scowl and found Charles Fraith leaning lazily against the frame, dressed in tweed and smirk. "Heard about your cake fiasco," he said cheerfully. "Came to see if you'd baked any more corpses." "You can laugh," said Agatha, stepping aside, "but half the village thinks I did it." Charles wandered in, glancing around with amused affection. "You do have a knack for attracting homicide, old girl. Ever considered it might be your perfume?" "Oh, shut up and pour the brandy," she said. He did so, settling comfortably into her armchair. "So," he said, swirling his glass, "what's your theory? Jealous rival baker, jilted ex, overzealous eater?" Agatha gave him a look. "My theory is that Dawn Carter knows more than she's letting on. She was far too composed yesterday. And Marjorie, that woman was trembling like a leaf before Peter even touched the cake. She's hiding something too." Charles smiled lazily. "And you're going to uncover it naturally." "Of course," she said. "Didn't Bill tell you to stay out of it?" "Bill tells me a lot of things, most of them tedious." He laughed softly. "You'll never change, Agatha, and thank God for that." When he'd gone, leaving the faint scent of brandy and charm behind, Agatha found herself pacing the sitting room. The moonlight caught on the teacup still stacked by the sink. Her mind replayed the fate. Peter's easy grin, the nervous glance from Dawn, Marjorie's white knuckles as she'd set down her masterpiece. Something there didn't fit. The logical part of her brain urged caution. The rest, the restless, defiant part that refused to be sidelined, was already sharpening her curiosity. She fetched another splash of brandy, raised the glass toward her reflection in the darkened window, and said quietly, "If someone thought they could make a fool of me with frosting, they've picked the wrong woman." Then she drank to that, and outside Carsley's night settled like a lid over a simmering pot. The drizzle had returned to Carsley, that fine, whispering sort that seemed to fall out of sheer habit rather than conviction. It blurred the cottages into soft shapes and gave the air a faint scent of damp roses and gossip. Agatha Raisin, wrapped in a raincoat the colour of bruised lilac, stood outside Dawn Carter's house with the air of a woman marching into enemy territory. She had debated all morning whether to pay the call. Common decency said one ought to console the bereaved. Common sense said one ought to avoid the bereaved when they were likely to accuse one of murder by frosting. But curiosity, that old familiar itch, had won the argument. Dawn answered the door looking infuriatingly composed. Her blonde hair gleamed in an immaculate chignon, her mascara unblemished, and her expression a study in tragic grace. Agatha's sympathy wilted on sight. "Agatha," said Dawn, her voice low and tremulous, "how kind of you to come." "Well," Agatha replied, stepping inside, "one must pay one's respects, though I wasn't sure if you'd be in the mood for visitors." "It helps to keep busy," said Dawn. "I've been sorting through things, wedding invitations, receipts, all those silly details that don't matter now." Agatha's eyes followed the motion of Dawn's hand to the stack of envelopes on the table, ivory, embossed, and still sealed. The top one bore a faint smudge, perhaps mascara, perhaps something less innocent. "Tea?" Dawn asked. "Please," said Agatha, perching on the edge of a spotless sofa. The room smelled faintly of lilies and lemon polish. As Dawn busied herself with the teapot, Agatha studied her profile. It wasn't grief that struck her, not the blotchy, swollen sort she'd seen in countless widowhoods. No, this was performance. Every movement was measured, every sigh theatrically timed. "He was so wonderful," Dawn said, returning with the tray. "Everyone adored Peter, but the truth is he had enemies in business." "Enemies?" Agatha repeated, accepting her tea. "He was in investments, wasn't he?" "Yes, high finance, hedge funds, all very complicated. You know how jealous people can get when someone's successful." Agatha stirred her tea slowly. "And you think one of these jealous types decided to sneak into a village fete and slip poison into his cake?" Dawn hesitated, her smile twitching. "Stranger things have happened." Agatha sipped. "Not in Carsley, they haven't." The silence that followed was faintly awkward, broken only by the clock ticking in the hallway. Dawn recovered first, patting Agatha's hand with condescending warmth. "You've been such a help to everyone, organising the competition. It's a shame things went so wrong. You mustn't let people's gossip upset you." "Gossip?" said Agatha sharply. "Oh, you know how they are. Someone said you'd been rather assertive with Marjorie Dent that morning." Agatha's temper flared. "Assertive? I told her fondant was too stiff. If that counts as aggression, we'd better outlaw pastry brushes." Dawn gave a sympathetic laugh. Of course. Still, best to keep a low profile for a bit. The police might find it awkward if I what?" Agatha cut in. "If I continue to exist." Dawn blinked, all innocence. "You said it, not me." Agatha stood abruptly. "You'll forgive me if I don't stay for another cup. I find I've lost my taste for sweet things." At that precise moment, a familiar voice drawled from the doorway, and here I was hoping for a slice of comfort cake. Charles Fraith strolled in, carrying his umbrella like a sceptre, and wearing that infuriating half-smile that suggested he found life, and Agatha, endlessly amusing. "Charles," said Dawn, surprised, "I didn't know you knew Peter." "I didn't," he said smoothly, "but I do know Agatha, and wherever she goes, calamity follows. I simply follow the scent." "You were just passing through, were you?" Agatha said dryly. "Naturally. I couldn't resist a little drama. Besides, I brought my car. Thought you might need a lift." It was useless to argue. Dawn fluttered her thanks as they left, her expression serene once more. Agatha felt something tighten in her chest, irritation, suspicion, and perhaps a faint, reluctant pity. "Well?" Charles asked as they reached his sleek black car. "How was the grieving bride?" "About as grief-stricken as a woman at a clearance sale," said Agatha. "She's hiding something, Charles, and she's not clever enough to hide it well." "You always say that," he said, unlocking the door, "until the murderer turns out to be the one with the best alibi and worst baking skills." They drove in companionable silence for a few minutes, the wipers keeping time with Agatha's thoughts. "Bill told me the police interviewed the caterer," she said finally. I think we should too. We? Yes, we. Don't look so terrified. I'll do the talking. You can stand there and look disarming. I always do, he said modestly. The caterer, a broad-faced woman named Moira, ran her business from a cottage on the edge of Mercester. Her kitchen smelled gloriously of pastry and resentment. "You're that Raisin woman," Moira said at once, "the one everyone's talking about." "Splendid," said Agatha. "Then we can skip introductions. I just need a moment of your time." Moira eyed her warily. "If this is about the wedding tasting, I already told the police. I just supplied the food. Didn't even bake that cake. That was Marjorie Dent." "But you were there earlier in the week," said Agatha, "setting up menus. Did you notice anything unusual between Peter Draycott and Marjorie?" Moira pursed her lips. "Unusual? Well, they did have words. He told her to stop fussing like an old hen. She called him a greedy upstart. I didn't think much of it. People bicker when there's money and publicity involved." "Publicity?" Agatha asked. "Oh, he was paying Marjorie to make the official wedding cake. Wanted it featured in the Cotswold Gazette. Said it'd be good press for them both." Charles raised an eyebrow. "Rather a morbid outcome, wouldn't you say?" Moira shrugged. "You can't blame me. I just do quiches." Back in the car, Agatha sat frowning at the dashboard. So Peter insulted Marjorie, but was paying her. That's one motive twisted around another. Charles stretched, looking far too comfortable. Or perhaps Dawn found out about the arrangement and didn't like her groom spending money, or attention, on another woman. "Don't be ridiculous," said Agatha, though the idea clearly lodged in her mind. "Not ridiculous," he said lightly, "just deliciously scandalous." She ignored him. "I'd like to see inside that cottage again. Something about those invitations bothered me." "You can't just waltz back in," he said. "You'll have the whole village whispering you're casing the place." "They already are," she snapped. When she reached home that afternoon, the rain had thickened to a steady patter. She hung her coat, made tea, and sat at her desk with a notebook. The page filled quickly under her pen. Suspects, Dawn Carter, too calm, too rehearsed. Marjorie Dent, argument, motive, opportunity. Moira the caterer, proximity and gossip. Agatha Raisin, according to half of Castley. She stared at the final line. There was a certain grim symmetry in it. Her thoughts returned to Dawn's kitchen, the untouched invitations, the perfect mascara, and on the counter, a pink box of cupcakes, identical to those at the fete. Dawn had said she'd been sorting things, but why keep the cakes, uneaten and unsent? A sudden chill ran down her spine. What if Peter's death hadn't been meant for him at all? Before she could pursue the thought, the phone shrilled. She snatched it up. "Aggie!" cried Roy Silver, voice brimming with mischief. "Darling, your front page. Cotswold Sleuth's deadly cake recipe." "Oh, it's marvellous publicity," Agatha groaned. "Roy, don't thank me yet. I've sent a photographer to your cottage for a few shots of you with an apron. Try to look remorseful and glamorous." Agatha hung up mid-sentence and reached for the brandy. Outside, the drizzle turned to a steady rain. Inside, Agatha glared at her reflection in the window, a middle-aged woman with too much nerve and too little patience. "If someone thought they could make me the villain of their little wedding drama," she muttered, "they're about to learn I don't do victim." She took a fortifying sip, then another. The storm outside gathered, but so did her resolve. The morning began with a sound Agatha Raisin had come to dread, the thud of the Cotswold Gazette landing on her doorstep. It lay there like an accusation in newsprint, its headline practically smirking, "Agatha Raisin and the Cake of Death." She stared down at it, teacup in hand, fury blooming behind her eyes. The audacity to use her name in such proximity to confectionery homicide. She snatched up the paper, nearly sloshing tea onto her slippers, and scanned the column. It was worse than expected, full of insinuations about her dramatic flair and reputation for trouble, illustrated by an unflattering photograph from a parish fete 3 summers ago. By the time she dressed and marched into Mercester, her mood could have curdled cream. The Cotswold Gazette office was a narrow building wedged between a charity shop and a cafe that claimed to serve artisan toast. Agatha stormed in, her heels clicking like gunfire. A timid receptionist looked up and went pale. "Where's Jeremy Fenn?" demanded Agatha. Mr. Fenn's at lunch." "At 10:30 in the morning?" "It's an early one." Agatha folded her arms. "Of course it is. The man's probably cowering behind a sandwich somewhere, waiting for me to cool down. Perhaps you could leave a message. Yes, I'll leave one. Agatha leaned across the counter and scribbled on a notepad. When you've digested your lies, I'll expect a retraction, in print and in full. Agatha Raisin. She underlined her name twice for emphasis. As she turned to go, a familiar voice called, I should have guessed you'd be here. Bill Wong stood at the doorway, looking both weary and amused. Don't tell me, said Agatha. You're here to arrest me for harassing journalists. Tempting, he said mildly. But no, I was just grabbing coffee. Thought I'd save you the trouble of calling me later to complain. Then let's not waste time. What's the latest? Don't give me the ongoing investigation nonsense. Bill sighed. All right. Marjorie Dent's bakery license has been suspended pending inquiry. Agatha blinked. Suspended? On what grounds? Routine. Health and safety while we check her supplies. She's not taking it well. Good heavens, the woman's probably in tears. She is, which is why you shouldn't. But Agatha was already heading for the door. Marjorie Dent's bakery sat forlornly on the high street, its display window emptied of pastries, as if the joy had been baked out of the place. Agatha found Marjorie in the back room, face blotchy and eyes red. The sight softened her fury a little, but only a little. Marjorie, Agatha began briskly, I hear you've been suspended. I've come to get the truth, not the gossip. Marjorie dabbed at her nose. I didn't do it, Mrs. Raisin. I swear on my mother's grave I didn't frost that cake. What do you mean you didn't frost it? My assistant Millie did. She's young but clever. Dawn Carter said she wanted something extra special for the tasting, made quite the fuss about it. Told Millie to use her own secret syrup instead of the usual almond extract. I told the girl to be careful, but Dawn was insistent. Said she'd handle any complaints personally. Agatha's eyes narrowed. Dawn Carter provided an ingredient for your cake. Yes, a little bottle looked like essence. Millie said it smelled sweet enough. I never thought to question it. Where's this Millie now? Marjorie sniffed. Gone. Took off yesterday morning. Her aunt says she's on a holiday in Bristol. Holiday? With her job on the line? Agatha pursed her lips. And you've no idea where she's staying? Not a clue. She's a timid thing. Probably scared stiff. Charles Fraith chose that moment to appear, hands in pockets and smile firmly in place. There you are, Aggie. I thought you might need backup, or a witness for your next outburst. Charles, said Agatha icily, I am working. So I see. Marjorie, my condolences on the ruin of your eclairs. They'll be missed. Oh, go butter someone else's toast, Agatha snapped. Then softening, she turned back to Marjorie. If Millie truly was coerced, then she may have panicked after the poisoning. We'll find her. Charles raised an eyebrow. We? Yes, we, Agatha said firmly. You can drive. Millie's cottage stood on the edge of Carsley, half hidden behind overgrown lilac. Her aunt, a sharp-eyed woman in a knitted shawl, answered the door. Millie's away, she said at once, arms folded. Went to Bristol for a bit of sea air. Sea air, repeated Agatha. Inland Bristol? She needed a rest. All that baking, you know. It wears a girl down. Charles smiled disarmingly. Of course. Baking can be murder on the nerves. The aunt's lips tightened. If that's a joke, sir, it's in poor taste. You'd be surprised how often I hear that, Charles replied cheerfully. Agatha took a more direct approach. Did Millie leave an address, a number, anything at all? No, just packed and left. Funny, said Agatha. You don't strike me as the sort to let a young girl vanish without contact. The woman's expression flickered. She said she needed to think. I didn't ask questions. Well, I do, Agatha said. A long silence followed. Finally, the aunt muttered. She was crying that morning. Said she'd done something awful. I told her it couldn't be that bad, but she said she couldn't face Marjorie or the police. Then she left. Agatha and Charles exchanged a glance. We'll let you know if we find her, Agatha said, softening slightly. As they walked back to the car, Charles said, You do have a way with people, somewhere between a police inspector and a chainsaw. At least I get results, Agatha shot back. True. Still, I can't decide whether to admire or fear you. Both, she said briskly. Later that afternoon, Agatha dropped by the vicarage. Mrs. Bloxby was in her garden, trimming roses with saintly calm. I can always tell when you're up to something, the vicar's wife said, not looking up. Your expression is halfway between righteous fury and indigestion. Agatha smiled faintly. It's the fumes from hypocrisy. You wouldn't believe what Dawn Carter's been up to. I can imagine, Mrs. Bloxby said gently, but I didn't call you here to talk about Dawn. I came across something rather odd. She handed over a folded newspaper clipping. It was an engagement announcement dated 2 years prior. Peter Draycott and Miss Harriet Lang of Cirencester, to be married in spring. Harriet Lang, Agatha murmured. She's been seen in Mercester recently, Mrs. Bloxby said. A neighbour mentioned she'd been asking after Peter. Apparently it ended badly between them. Agatha frowned, studying the photograph. Peter was grinning in it, dimpled and smug, the same grin she'd seen the day he died. But her attention snagged on something else, his cufflinks. Look at these, she said. Same pair he wore at the fete, but these are engraved. Mrs. Bloxby peered. Initials H.L. Not D.C. for Dawn Carter, Agatha murmured. So why was he still wearing his ex-fiancée's cufflinks at his own wedding tasting? Mrs. Bloxby gave a small, thoughtful sigh. Perhaps sentimentality, or guilt. Or a secret he didn't want unearthed, said Agatha. Back at Lilac Cottage, twilight crept over the rooftops. Agatha spread the clipping, her notes, and a half-empty glass of wine across the kitchen table. The list of suspects now felt more tangled than ever. Dawn with her syrup, Marjorie with her bakery, Millie missing, and now Harriet Lang, the fiancée who might not have been as former as everyone thought. Charles's voice drifted through from the sitting room. He'd stayed on, under the pretext of moral support, though Agatha suspected he simply enjoyed watching her work herself into a lather. You realize, he said lazily, you're turning this into a full-time occupation again. You could just wait for Bill to solve it. Agatha shot him a look over her glasses. And missed the chance to clear my own name. Never. Besides, Bill wouldn't spot a clue if it wore a name tag. He spotted you once, Charles said, grinning. Yes, and has regretted it ever since. The clock ticked. Rain tapped gently on the window. Agatha stared again at the photograph of Peter and Harriet, tracing the engraved letters with her fingertip. There was something dreadfully telling about a man who carried the remnants of one love into the promise of another. Men, she muttered. They never throw anything away, except good sense. Charles appeared in the doorway, holding out her coat. Where are we going now? To find out how sentimental a dead man can be, she said, slipping her arms into the sleeves, and to see what happens when his secrets start melting faster than icing in the sun. The next morning arrived bright and indecently cheerful, as if the Cotswold sun had no sense of decorum. Agatha Raisin stood at her kitchen window, glaring at the weather. A proper drizzle would have suited her mood, something mournful to accompany the thought of poison, deceit, and gossip printed in the Gazette. Instead, there was blue sky and the sound of birdsong that seemed to mock her irritation. Charles Fraith strolled in without knocking, holding 2 croissants and his usual self-satisfied expression. "Morning, Aggie. You look ready to declare war." "I am," she said, "on slander, stupidity, and the woman who thinks she can outwit me with almond syrup." "Ah," he said, taking a bite. "Breakfast and vengeance, I approve. But what's this about syrup?" Agatha slapped down a notebook. Marjorie's assistant, Millie, the one who conveniently vanished, supposedly added a special syrup to the cake, supplied by Dawn Carter. I intend to find her and wring the truth out of her before the police ruin it with protocol. Charles sighed. "You realize Bristol is an hour away." "Good," said Agatha. "It'll give me time to rehearse my questions. We're going shopping for tea towels." "Tea towels?" "That's what I'll tell anyone who asks. No one ever questions domestic errands. Now finish your croissant. We leave in 10 minutes. The drive to Bristol began in brittle silence. Agatha, behind the wheel, was a picture of grim determination. Charles, beside her, made only token attempts at charm before wisely lapsing into amused resignation. They reached the outskirts just before noon. The city bustled with shoppers and students, none of whom looked likely to have iced a murder weapon. After a few false leads and an unfortunate detour through a vegan deli, she might work here, Charles had claimed, they found Millie at last, behind the counter of a tiny cafe painted pale pink and smelling of coffee and nerves. She was younger than Agatha remembered, barely 20, with a face that seemed permanently startled. When she saw Agatha, she nearly dropped a tray of muffins. "Millie," said Agatha, lowering her voice, "we need a word." I can't, Millie stammered. I've got customers. They can wait, said Agatha firmly. Charles intervened with a smile that could have melted polar ice. Perhaps we could step outside. We'll buy coffee first, of course. A few minutes later, they sat on a bench overlooking the harbour side. Millie perched between them like a sparrow caught in a gale. I didn't mean any harm, she said in a rush. Mrs. Carter gave me that bottle herself, said it was almond essence, the expensive kind. She even sniffed it and said how lovely it was. How was I to know? Tell me exactly what happened, said Agatha. Millie twisted her hands. Mrs. Carter came in 2 days before the fete. She was all smiles, but she kept saying the cake had to be perfect, that Peter adored almonds and would notice if anything was wrong. She gave me that syrup and told me to mix it in with the frosting. I thought it was odd she wanted me, not Mrs. Dent, to do it, but she said Mrs. Dent's piping was too heavy-handed. And after Peter died? Millie swallowed hard. I panicked. I thought they'd blame me. I packed a bag and left the next morning. I didn't even tell my aunt where I was going. Please don't tell the police I'm here. Agatha studied her. The girl's fear looked genuine, but guilt and fear often wore the same face. If you're innocent, you've nothing to fear, she said. That's not true, Millie whispered. In Carsley, innocence doesn't count for much once people start talking. Charles leaned back. She's right, you know. The village thrives on scandal like bees on sugar. Agatha ignored him. Do you still have the bottle? Millie shook her head. I left it in the bakery. Mrs. Dent threw everything away after, you know. Please, I just want to forget. Agatha sighed. Forgetting never solves anything. It just leaves space for someone else to remember selectively. You won't tell Dawn I spoke to you, will you? Agatha's mouth curved. Not unless I find a reason to. As they walked back to the car, Charles said quietly, Poor thing. She looks about ready to faint. She's lucky I didn't shake the truth out of her, Agatha replied. Still, it confirms what I suspected. Dawn supplied that syrup, which means she's either the killer or the most gullible bride in Gloucestershire. You always think everyone's guilty until proven otherwise, said Charles, and I'm rarely wrong. Except about men, he murmured. She glared. Do shut up. They returned to Carsley in time for the late afternoon drizzle Agatha had been craving. She called Bill Wong before even taking off her coat. You found Millie? He said, sounding resigned. Yes, and before you ask, she's safe. She told me Dawn Carter gave her a bottle labelled almond essence, likely the source of the poison. Agatha, Bill said in that tone she hated, calm, reasonable, and faintly parental. You shouldn't be chasing witnesses. The lab's still analysing the samples. We don't even know if the cyanide came from the frosting yet. Oh, please. You've known it from the start. Cyanide smells like almonds. The frosting smelled like almonds. Do the arithmetic. Do the paperwork, Bill countered. You've got to stop meddling before you scare someone into silence. I'm not meddling. I'm investigating. There's a difference. Not in the eyes of the law. Then the law needs glasses, he sighed. Promise me you'll leave it alone for 24 hours. Agatha hesitated. Fine, 24 hours, but if you haven't solved it by then, I will. You already think you have. That's because I usually do. She hung up before he could reply. That evening, Charles invited her to dinner at his manor, insisting it was to take her mind off things. Agatha suspected it was mainly to show off his new cook, a sleek woman in a linen apron who made everything look effortless, including despising Agatha. The dining room was warm and golden, the fire crackling in the hearth. Agatha sat opposite Charles, trying not to appear impressed. This is nice, she admitted, almost civilized. You sound surprised, said Charles. I can do civility when properly motivated. By gossip, perhaps. By your company, naturally, she sniffed. Flattery won't save you from my questions. How well did you know Dawn Carter? The pause was brief but noticeable. Charles reached for his wine with a studied casualness. Hardly at all. Met her at a charity gala last year. We may have danced once or twice. Agatha raised an eyebrow. Once or twice? 3 times, maybe 4, but nothing improper. Improper by your standards or mine? Yours are higher, I imagine, he said lightly, but a faint colour rose in his cheeks. Agatha leaned back, satisfied. So Dawn Carter knew you, socially at least. Interesting coincidence. You can't suspect me, surely. I don't rule anyone out, she said. Not even charming playboys with country estates and poor taste in fiancés. You wound me, Aggie. Good. It means you're still capable of feeling something other than smugness. The cook reappeared with pudding, breaking the tension, though the air between them still hummed faintly. They ate in companionable silence, the kind that left too much unsaid. After dinner, Charles escorted her to the door, his hand brushing her arm. Do try not to get murdered, won't you? I'd miss our arguments. Pfah, said Agatha, though she smiled despite herself. When she returned home, the cottage was quiet, its shadows deepened by the rain outside. She hung up her coat, fed the cat, and poured herself a small brandy. Purely medicinal, she told herself. She was halfway up the stairs when she noticed it. A folded piece of paper, pushed under the door. No postmark, no envelope, just her name scrawled in thick, uneven ink. Her first thought was annoyance. Another bill, perhaps, or a note from Mrs. Blocksby about the parish raffle. But when she opened it, the words were stark and chilling. Stop asking about the cake. You're next on the menu. Agatha stared at it for a long moment, the firelight flickering across her face. Then she snorted softly. Well, she said aloud, at least someone's paying attention. She slipped the note into her pocket, finished her brandy and muttered, If they think that'll frighten me, they've clearly never met Agatha Raisin. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming on the roof like applause for a performance just beginning. By mid-afternoon, Agatha Raisin had made up her mind that fear was for other people. So much for 24 hours, she told the kettle. Threatening notes, poisonings, and village gossip were bad enough, but surrendering to them, that would be intolerable. She'd faced worse: heartbreak, humiliation, and most recently, being called a poor cook in the Cotswold Gazette. No, she would fight back in her own way, with charm, cunning, and cake. Her plan had taken shape between cups of strong tea and muttered insults at the local press. That evening, she would host an informal cake tasting to, as she put it, restore Carsley's morale and cleanse the collective palate. The real reason, of course, was investigative. Bring everyone together, the suspects, the witnesses, even the enemies, and see what cracked under polite conversation. She spent the day in a blur of activity, directing poor Mrs. Blocksby like a general leading a nervous army. Do you think inviting the Gazette editor was wise? Mrs. Blocksby asked gently, helping lay out napkins. Wise? No. Strategic? Absolutely, said Agatha. If he's in my house, he can't print more nonsense about me in tomorrow's edition, and besides, it'll be good for him to choke on my shortbread. Agatha, said Mrs. Blocksby, with the mild reproach of an angel speaking to a wayward soul, you might find forgiveness more effective than sugar. You'd be surprised what sugar can do when properly applied, Agatha replied, eyeing her three-tier sponge like a weapon. By 6 o'clock, the sitting room at Lilac Cottage looked almost festive. Fairy lights glowed along the mantelpiece, and the table was laden with an array of cakes. Fruit, chocolate, lemon drizzle, all carefully arranged to suggest abundance rather than interrogation. The scent of vanilla and butter filled the air, disguising the sharp note of curiosity beneath. Her guests arrived in order of suspicion. Marjorie Dent came first, red-eyed but defiant, carrying a tray of flapjacks as a peace offering. Then Dawn Carter swept in, overdressed as usual, in a floral dress that screamed grieving glamour. The editor, Jeremy Fenn, followed, all apologetic smiles and nervous sweat, clutching a bottle of wine as though it might serve as absolution. Mrs. Blocksby, calm and composed, arrived last, murmuring blessings that seemed to soothe everyone but Agatha. Well, Agatha said brightly, we've all had quite a time, haven't we? But I thought we could do with something sweet to smooth things over. Or sugarcoat it, muttered Marjorie under her breath. Dawn shot her a look of icy sympathy. Let's not be unkind, Marjorie. We've all suffered enough. Some more than others, Marjorie retorted. The room froze for a heartbeat. Agatha, ever quick to seize control, poured tea with exaggerated calm. Do sit down, everyone. No need to glare when you can chew. For a while, there was only the sound of cutlery and cautious politeness. Agatha watched like a hawk. Dawn was smiling too much, brittle, perfect smiles that didn't reach her eyes. The editor fidgeted and complimented everything in sight. Marjorie picked at her flapjack like someone handling evidence. And Mrs. Blocksby, bless her, kept the conversation alive with gentle inquiries about parish events and weather patterns. Such a pity about the rain last week, she said mildly. Yes, said Agatha, her tone equally mild, though it did wonders for the gardens. My roses are thriving, unlike certain reputations. Jeremy Fenn choked on a crumb. Mrs. Raisin, if this is about the headline— It's exactly about the headline, said Agatha, sugar-sweet. I hope you found it amusing. I didn't write it personally, he stammered. Of course not, she said. Your paper writes itself, doesn't it? Mrs. Blocksby cleared her throat gently. Perhaps another slice of sponge. The tension eased slightly. Conversation drifted to safer ground, upcoming fates, the new Vicar's sermon series, and, inevitably, the topic of cyanide. Nasty stuff, said Jeremy, eager to sound worldly. You can smell it, can't you? Almonds, isn't it? Dawn's teacup rattled against her saucer. Agatha caught it instantly. Yes, she said casually, pretending to stir her tea. That faint, sweet scent, almost pleasant if you didn't know what it meant. Curious, isn't it? Is it? Dawn asked too quickly. Her voice was too bright. Oh, yes, said Agatha. It's always the sweet things that kill you. Dawn gave a tight laugh and glanced at her watch. Well, this has been lovely, Agatha, but I really must— Stay, Agatha said softly. We haven't had pudding. The insistence froze Dawn mid-step. For a moment, something flickered behind her smile. Anger, perhaps, or fear, but it vanished as quickly as it came. When the last guest had gone and the laughter had faded into the night, Agatha stood in her doorway, arms crossed. The party had gone well, if success could be measured by discomfort. She'd seen enough to confirm her instincts. Dawn was rattled, and the editor was useless. Mrs. Blocksby lingered to help tidy. You're playing a dangerous game, she said softly, stacking plates. Nonsense. It's only cake and conversation, said Agatha, though she didn't entirely believe it. You saw how she flinched. That woman's hiding something. Perhaps, said Mrs. Blocksby, but guilt and grief can look very much alike. Try not to forget that. Agatha sighed. You always take the charitable view. If someone poisoned you, I'd probably still apologize to them for the inconvenience. Mrs. Blocksby smiled. It's my job to think kindly, dear. Yours, apparently, is to think suspiciously. Between us, we might make one sensible person. They parted with affectionate exasperation, and Agatha returned to the kitchen, sleeves rolled up. She was halfway through scrubbing the teapot when something caught her eye, a glint of glass outside the window near the garden wall. Curious, she went out into the cool night. The air smelled of damp earth and lingering sugar. There, wedged between the ivy and the gravel path, was a small bottle, its label torn but legible. Mercester Pharmacy, Almond Essence. Agatha crouched, examining it with a mix of triumph and dread. The bottle was empty. She pinched it by the rim with a tea towel and dropped it into a freezer bag from the drawer. Bill Wong arrived the next morning, summoned by a brisk phone call that had left him no room to refuse. You realize, he said, holding the bottle in a gloved hand, this is technically interfering with evidence. Oh, do stop being so procedural, said Agatha. It was in my garden, which makes it my evidence. Or planted evidence, he said mildly. Don't ruin it, Bill. This could be the link we need. A bottle from a chemist's in Mercester, right? That same chemist was burgled last week. You told me yourself. That's true, he admitted reluctantly. The burglar took several controlled substances, cyanide among them. Agatha folded her arms. Well then, unless my hydrangeas are running a drug ring, someone left that bottle for a reason. Or to frame you, said Bill. Agatha hesitated, then forced a laugh. Don't be ridiculous. Who'd dare? You'd be surprised, said Bill. Stay alert, Agatha. Whoever poisoned Peter may not appreciate your enthusiasm. They can send as many notes as they like, she said. I'm not scared. He gave her a long look. That's what worries me. By late afternoon, Agatha was regretting her declaration of fearlessness, not because she'd changed her mind, but because Roy Silver had arrived, uninvited, unstoppable, and carrying a camera the size of his ego. Darling, he cried, sweeping into the cottage, I've come to rescue your reputation. Picture it. Agatha Raisin, the real story, a digital exclusive. Roy, said Agatha, horrified, put that thing down. Impossible. The world must see your bravery. It's what my followers crave. Authenticity with a touch of peril. My peril is increasing by the second, she muttered. Roy pranced about, filming the remains of the cake-tasting evening. Perfect lighting, so domestic, so village noir, will get millions of views. "We'll get sued," said Agatha, snatching a dishcloth to hide the evidence bottle. "Don't be such a fusspot. Oh, what's this?" He aimed his camera at a stray receipt on the sideboard. "That's private," said Agatha, lunging for it. "Relax, it's only fabric or something. Mercester Bridal Boutique, paid in full 2 months ago." "Oh, how sweet. Wedding prep." Agatha froze. "Read that again." Roy blinked. "It says Dawn Carter, wedding dress. Ordered 2 months ago. Why?" "Because," said Agatha slowly, her mind whirring, "Peter only proposed a month ago." Roy's grin widened. "You mean?" "I mean," Agatha said, snatching the receipt, "our blushing bride was rather ahead of schedule." "A control freak? Or a woman who knew exactly what she wanted," said Agatha, her voice low, "including a husband who might not have agreed." Roy beamed. "Oh, this is gold. Can I quote you?" "Roy," said Agatha, turning toward him with a look that made him step back, "if you upload 1 second of this nonsense before I say so, I'll strangle you with your own scarf." "Understood," he said cheerfully, "but at least let me film your serious face. The viewers adore it." "Out!" He went, still filming his retreat. Agatha sank into her armchair, the receipt fluttering in her hand. Outside, dusk had begun to fall, painting the village gold and grey. She looked again at the elegant cursive of Dawn's signature. Perfect, confident, smug. "The bride was ready before the groom even asked," she murmured, and maybe before he had a chance to say no. Her cat meowed softly from the window. Agatha sighed, setting down the receipt. "Don't look at me like that, Hodge. Some people knit. I solve murders." She poured herself a final glass of wine, feeling the quiet thrill of certainty settle over her. The pieces were beginning to fit, and she, Agatha Raisin, was far from finished. The morning of what should have been Castley's grandest social event, the wedding of Dawn Carter and the late Peter Draycott, dawned with the kind of grey, oppressive sky that felt designed for funerals. The clouds hung low over the cottages, sulking, while the church bells tolled half-heartedly, as if embarrassed by the whole business. Agatha Raisin stood at her window, watching villagers drift towards St. James's like extras in a melodrama. The rain had paused, but the air smelled of damp grass and bad decisions. "A memorial service in place of a wedding," she muttered, fastening a pearl earring. Only in Castley could death and canapé planning coexist. Mrs. Bloxby had called earlier, urging kindness. Agatha had agreed, in theory. In practice, she was itching to observe the spectacle. She suspected Dawn's insistence on hosting the event had less to do with grief and more with maintaining her grip on attention. By the time Agatha reached the church, the nave was crowded. The floral arrangements, pink lilies and white roses, reeked of determination rather than mourning. Dawn Carter stood near the altar, immaculate in a dove-grey suit and a fascinator that wobbled like moral certainty in a gale. Her makeup was flawless. Even her tearful expression looked rehearsed. Her makeup was flawless. Soft rose-pink lipstick. Even her tearful expression looked rehearsed. "Poor thing," whispered Mrs. Bloxby beside Agatha. "Poor nothing," Agatha whispered back. "She's enjoying this." "Agatha?" "Well, she is. Look at her. She's got that centre of attention glow. I'd give her points for performance." Bill Wong, stationed discreetly by the aisle, gave Agatha a look that said behave. She pretended innocence. The vicar began the service, his voice soothing and forgettable. Dawn dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief every few sentences, occasionally glancing around to ensure maximum sympathy. A few villagers sniffled on cue, others craned to see what she was wearing. When it ended, the crowd moved to the parish hall for the reception, a word that made Agatha wince. Tables groaned under quiches, sausage rolls, and, inevitably, a selection of cakes that made her stomach tighten with irony. Charles Fraith appeared at her elbow, looking annoyingly elegant in tweed. "Morbidly festive, isn't it?" he murmured. "Castley at its best," she replied. "Bread, butter, and hypocrisy." He chuckled. "You're only jealous she managed to get a crowd without a murder investigation first." "Give it time," said Agatha. The atmosphere in the hall was thick with gossip. People spoke in hushed tones while balancing paper plates. Agatha circulated like a detective at a village fete, nodding and eavesdropping. Dawn glided from group to group, offering smiles that didn't reach her eyes. Then Agatha noticed her slipping out through a side door, quiet, swift, and clearly determined not to be followed. which of course guaranteed that Agatha followed. The vestry was cool and shadowy, the air faintly scented with polish and lilies. Agatha crept closer, heels clicking softly against the flagstones, until she heard Dawn's voice, sharp, low, furious. "You said it would be after the ceremony. The money was supposed to come through once we were married. Now it's chaos. Lawyers, police, everything ruined. Do you hear me? You've ruined everything." A pause. The muffled sound of a male voice on the other end. Indistinct but urgent. "No, don't call again," Dawn snapped. "I'm handling it." Agatha strained to catch more, but a sneeze, her own traitorous sneeze courtesy of the flowers, betrayed her. She ducked behind a curtain, heart hammering, as Dawn whirled around. "Who's there?" Agatha emerged with what she hoped was a casual smile. "Just me. I was looking for the ladies." Dawn's expression flickered between fury and panic before settling into brittle civility. "The ladies is through the hall, Mrs. Raisin." "Ah, silly me," Agatha said. "Terribly easy to lose one's way between grief and gossip." Dawn brushed past her, perfume sharp and expensive. "You should go home, Mrs. Raisin. You thrive on tragedy. I don't." "You might want to tell that to your wardrobe," Agatha muttered once she'd gone. She waited until the sound of heels faded, then examined the small table by the phone. Nothing obvious. A champagne flute, a smudged lipstick tissue, a folded program. But beneath the vase she noticed a corner of paper torn from an envelope, faint ink stains, the kind used for check writing. Before she could pocket it, a voice made her jump. "Agatha," said Bill, appearing in the doorway. "Why am I not surprised?" "Because you've known me too long," she said briskly. "Dawn was just here on the phone ranting about money. The money was supposed to come through after the ceremony. Her words, not mine." Bill frowned. "Did you see who she called?" "No, but whoever it was, she's in deeper than she's pretending." On the vestry table, a white linen handkerchief lay half under the service sheet. Agatha slid it into her pocket almost absently, noting the neat embroidery, MD. He sighed. "All right, don't touch anything, and don't do anything stupid," she finished. "Too late, darling." Back in the hall, the mood had shifted. The villagers, never content with simple emotion, had moved on to moral judgment. Was it indecent to serve champagne at a memorial? Agatha thought not. At least it made the crowd more honest. Dawn stood again at the centre, glass raised for a toast. Her smile had recovered its varnish, her voice carrying over the murmurs. "To Peter," she declared. "Gone too soon, but never forgotten." Agatha leaned toward Bill. "She's performing again. You could sell tickets." "Shh," he said, though his lips twitched. The crowd lifted glasses. Dawn took a sip, then blinked, just once, before swaying slightly. Agatha assumed at first it was drama, until the glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the floor. A collective gasp rippled through the hall. Dawn's eyes widened, her mouth opened soundlessly, and she crumpled. For a heartbeat, the scene froze. Then chaos erupted, chairs scraping, people shouting. Mrs. Blocksby called for someone to fetch the vicar, while Charles guided the trembling women away from the sight. Bill knelt beside Dawn, checking her pulse. His expression darkened. "Call an ambulance. Now." Agatha's stomach turned cold. She'd seen death enough times to recognize it. "Bill?" she asked quietly. He looked up, grim. Too late. The police cordoned off the hall within the hour. The once merry tables now looked obscene, a grotesque buffet of untouched food beneath fluorescent light. Agatha, confined to a pew with Charles and Mrs. Blocksby, watched the forensic team collect glasses. She felt the faint, nauseating sense of déjà vu that came from realizing lightning had struck twice, in the same parish. "2 murders in as many weeks," murmured Charles. "You do know how to keep life interesting." Agatha ignored him, eyes scanning the scene. Something was wrong. Too neat, too theatrical. Her gaze landed on Dawn's champagne glass, now sealed in an evidence bag. The lipstick mark was a bold coral red, stark against the rim. She frowned. "That's not her colour." "What?" said Bill, overhearing. "Dawn's lipstick," Agatha said. "She wore rose pink today. Barely their stuff." "That's coral. Someone switched her glass." Bill's expression tightened. "You're sure?" "Positive. I noticed earlier when she told me off in the vestry. Couldn't miss it. She'd never wear something that clashed with her fascinator." "We'll check fingerprints," Bill said, already signalling to a technician. Mrs. Bloxby, ever calm, touched Agatha's arm. "Perhaps you should rest, dear. This must be dreadful for you." "Dreadful," Agatha repeated. "It's infuriating. Someone murdered the murderer before I could prove she was one." Charles sighed. "Always a professional grievance." "Don't start," she snapped, but her voice lacked heat. The fatigue of it all, the lies, the vanity, the endless pretending, had pressed on her. When the crowd was finally released, night had fallen. The drizzle had returned, steady and cold. Agatha walked home alone, heels clicking on wet pavement. Her reflection glimmered in the puddles, part detective, part tired woman with no one waiting at home except a cat. At her gate, she paused. The evening's noise seemed to linger, the gasps, the whispers, the faint clink of glasses. She took a long breath, half relief, half resolve. Inside, she hung her coat, lit a lamp, and kicked off her shoes. On the table lay the small folded program she'd picked up earlier, now smudged with fingerprints. She reached into her pocket for a tissue, and her hand brushed against something she didn't remember taking. A white handkerchief. She held it up. Embroidered initials glinted in the lamplight. M.D. Marjorie Dent. Agatha sank into her chair, staring at it. Coincidence? Carelessness? Or something far more deliberate? Hodge the cat leapt onto the armrest, curling up as if nothing in the world had changed. "Oh, it's changed all right," she said softly. "Twice over." She tucked the handkerchief into a drawer, her mind already turning. Marjorie had motive, Dawn had opportunity, and someone clever, had just tidied the stage. Outside, the drizzle thickened, whispering against the windows. Agatha poured herself a small brandy, stared into the amber swirl and murmured, "Another toast gone wrong. You'd think people would learn." Carsley had not seen such excitement since the great scone scandal of 2018, when the Women's Institute treasurer had been accused of substituting margarine for butter. Now, with 2 deaths and no wedding to show for it, the village was practically vibrating with gossip. Even the ducks on the pond seemed to quack in speculation. Agatha Raisin, however, had no patience for speculation. She had facts, or rather fragments of them, and a headache that refused to yield to aspirin or brandy. The morning after Dawn Carter's untimely demise found her striding toward Marjorie Dent's bakery, chin high, coat collar up, and handbag swinging like a weapon of moral purpose. Bill Wong followed at a steadier pace, looking like a man who had resigned himself to trouble before breakfast. "You realize," he said mildly, "that technically this is my job." "Technically," Agatha said without slowing, "you'd still be filling out forms if I hadn't found half your leads. Someone has to shake the truth loose." "Yes, and it's usually you doing the shaking." "Then let's get on with it before she bolts." The bakery looked forlorn, its display case empty, its once cheerful chalkboard announcing only closed until further notice. Through the window, Marjorie Dent sat alone at a corner table, the light catching on her silver hair. She was icing biscuits, plain ones without flourish, like a penitent nun. Agatha pushed open the door, ignoring the faint tinkle of the bell. "Marjorie," she said briskly, "we need a word." Marjorie didn't look up. "If it's about orders, I'm not taking any. Health inspector's due next week." "It's not about scones, dear," said Agatha. She slid into the opposite chair, eyes narrowing. "It's about murder." Bill, ever the diplomat, gave a small nod of greeting. "We're not here to accuse anyone," he began, but Agatha cut across him. "Speak for yourself." Marjorie's hands trembled slightly, a smear of white icing on her knuckle. "I've told the police everything. I didn't kill Peter Draycott, and I certainly didn't poison that dreadful woman." Agatha reached into her handbag and produced the neatly folded handkerchief she'd found at the church. White linen, embroidered M.D. She placed it between them like evidence in a courtroom. "You dropped this," she said. Marjorie's breath caught. Her eyes darted to Bill, then back to Agatha. "Where did you—" "Vestry floor, right after Dawn's collapse. Care to explain?" For a long moment, only the clock ticked. Then Marjorie's shoulders sagged, the facade of composure cracking like burnt meringue. "I suppose it doesn't matter now," she said quietly. "It was all such a mess from the start." Agatha exchanged a quick glance with Bill. "Go on," she said, her tone softening. "Peter came to me months ago," Marjorie said. "He'd found out about the bakery's accounts. A little creative bookkeeping, nothing truly criminal, but enough to make trouble. He said he'd expose me unless I invested in one of his ventures." Blackmail, said Agatha flatly. Yes, Marjorie whispered. And then Dawn appeared, all teeth and perfume, saying she knew too. She wanted money for her new fitness studio. Said if I didn't pay, she'd share the story. Agatha frowned. So you planned revenge? Marjorie shook her head, tears glinting. No, I only wanted them to stop. I thought, if Peter were frightened, he'd back off. I bought cyanide online, told myself it was for pests. I even mixed a little into the syrup. But when it came to serving the cake, I lost my nerve. I swapped the plates, his for mine. I thought I'd stopped it in time. But Peter still got it, Bill said gently. Yes, she whispered. He must have taken mine by mistake. I thought I'd saved him. God help me, I thought I'd saved him. For once, Agatha was silent. The confession hung in the air, tragic and absurd in equal measure, a moral muddle dressed up in buttercream. Finally, Bill stood. You understand, I'll have to take this down formally, Mrs. Dent. Do what you must, Marjorie said, staring at her trembling hands. But I didn't poison Dawn. I swear it. I couldn't have. Agatha leaned forward. You're sure of that? Positive. I was in the kitchen with Mrs. Bloxby the entire time. She was, Bill confirmed. We've already checked the witness statements. Then who switched the champagne? Agatha murmured, more to herself than anyone. Outside, the drizzle had thickened to a steady patter. Agatha and Bill walked side by side through the damp village streets. The smell of wet stone and rising bread mingled in the air. So, Bill said, Marjorie's guilty of attempted murder, perhaps, but not the second death. No, said Agatha. That was someone else entirely, and I think I know who. Bill gave her a sidelong look. You've got that tone again. The one that means I'm right? The one that means I'll have to fill out another 20 pages of paperwork. Agatha smirked. Worth it. They reached the Cotswold Gazette office, a squat building wedged between the greengrocer's and the charity shop. Inside, Jeremy Fenn, the editor, looked up from his desk with the guilty air of a man caught with crumbs on his tie. Mrs. Raisin, he said nervously. Detective Wong. To what do I owe? Cut the niceties, Agatha snapped. You were at the memorial, weren't you? Enjoying the free champagne and scribbling your headlines. Purely as an observer. Then perhaps you'd like to observe this. She slapped a copy of his own paper onto the desk. Murder Bride's Secret Fortune, Exclusive Details. You printed that less than 24 hours after her death. How did you get the story so fast, He blustered. Public interest, Mrs. Raisin. I have sources. Yes, said Agatha coolly. Including the deceased, apparently. She threatened to sue you, didn't she, for libel? That's what she meant when she said someone had ruined everything. She'd discovered you'd been selling her private affairs to the tabloids. That's ridiculous. Bill stepped forward, voice calm but firm. We traced the number she called before she died. It was yours, Mr. Fenn. The editor's face drained of colour. She wanted to retract her statement, he stammered. Said she'd tell the press I'd made it all up. I panicked. I only meant to shut her up for a while. Agatha folded her arms. So you spiked her glass. I just poured her drink, he whispered. I didn't think. That seems to be a recurring theme, said Agatha. Bill produced his phone. Jeremy Fenn, I'm arresting you on suspicion of murder. The man slumped as if deflated. It was supposed to be a toast, he murmured. Just a toast. Agatha watched as Bill led him away, the drizzle glistening on the cobblestones. The onlookers, shopkeepers, pensioners, and two nosy teenagers murmured like pigeons. There you have it, she said dryly. A crime of vanity, greed, and bad journalism, all terribly modern. You sound almost disappointed, said Bill. A little. I'd hoped for something more elegant, a duel over recipes, perhaps. Still, murder by press release does have a certain irony. You'll give your statement at headquarters? Of course, she said, after I've had a proper cup of tea, and maybe a slice of cake, not that I'll enjoy it. Later, back at Lilac Cottage, the kettle hissed like a sigh. Agatha stood by the window, watching the rain soften into mist over the green. Carsley was settling again, gossip mellowing into rumour, rumour into legend. Mrs. Bloxby arrived with a tin of shortbread and a look of gentle concern. Bill rang, she said. It's all over then. For now, Agatha said. Marjorie's to be charged with something minor, I expect. The real culprit's behind bars. And I've learned that even in the Cotswolds, No one survives long when they try to mix greed with icing sugar. Mrs. Blocksby smiled faintly. That's almost poetic. It's exhaustion, said Agatha. If I start rhyming, fetch a doctor. They sat together, sipping tea. The clock ticked, the cat purred, and for a rare moment, peace felt possible. Do you ever tire of it? Mrs. Blocksby asked softly. Of what? All this, the drama, the danger. Agatha looked out at the damp roses in her garden, the raindrops catching on their petals. Sometimes, she admitted, but then someone lies to my face and I can't help myself. Mrs. Blocksby's eyes twinkled. Curiosity is a blessing and a curse. It's more fun than knitting, said Agatha. They shared a quiet laugh. Then Mrs. Blocksby rose, her hand warm on Agatha's shoulder. Try to rest, dear. Even detectives need a day off. When she'd gone, Agatha lingered by the fire. The village would move on. It always did. But she couldn't quite shake the melancholy that followed each solved case. Beneath her satisfaction lay something softer. Pity for Marjorie, contempt for Fen, and a faint, foolish longing for someone to share her triumphs with. She caught sight of herself in the mantel mirror, hair slightly awry, eyes bright with weariness. Oh, stop it, she muttered. Self-pity doesn't suit you. Hodge meowed from the armchair, unimpressed. Quite right, she said, settling beside him. Tomorrow I'll bake something safe. Lemon drizzle, perhaps. No secrets, no poison, just sugar, butter, and a little self-respect. Outside, the drizzle thickened again, steady and familiar, washing the village clean for whatever nonsense would come next. And Agatha Raisin, teacup in hand, allowed herself a small, satisfied smile.